And welcome back to the SG3 podcast, the podcast named for a Hindu who threw a football in middle school and had his teacher mesmerized. As always, I'm your host, Ravon, aka SG3. We got my partner, Shuffy, aka Alex, and today we have a very special guest. He's a writer of the National Football League. He works for FanSided's NFL Spin Zone. A colleague of mine, I'd like to welcome Scott Salomon to the show. Scott, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys tonight?
Doing good.
Good. Glad to hear it.
How about you, Alex?
And just chilling, watching the news flow. Got a lot going on. We had the Super Bowl. We had the parade following the Super Bowl, which I'm sure we'll get to. We've had you got college basketball ramping up. You got football transfer portal news at all times.
Mhm.
Coaches moving around left and right. So it's just been kind of a whirlwind of just trying to stay on top of everything that's going on. I think there's a lot of good and some changes in NFL coaching. Most notably, my defensive coordinator Zimmer getting
Mhm.
hired from Dallas that I'm not thrilled about, but we don't need to get into that tonight, do we? But
No, we will
regardless,
mention that you did mention that it happened, and I think that's pretty much fair to say because that is news.
Yeah, it
But
is.
we're not going to discuss it. And as always, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and follow us on our social media on X, which is a pretty popular platform. Can't believe it's still called that. But I will drop the ats of myself, of Alex, and Scott as well. Scott, I want to start with you. You've been very well versed writing for a number of outlets. How did sports writing get into your life?
Well, I started at a really young age, probably when I was in middle school, and I really took a liking to it. And I was very creative. Maybe it's because I'm left-handed and right-brained. I don't know, but I always enjoyed it. I could never be an athlete, so I figured the best thing to do would be to cover the teams and get used to the players and be able to go out and write. And I was able to accomplish a lot at a young age. I wrote for USA Today while I was in college, and it was a great way to go to school. A lot of people are waiting tables and bussing tables when they're in college, but I was covering national championship Miami Hurricane football games, and that was really my first love and my first passion.
When you mention the Miami Hurricanes, are you talking about the 2001 team specifically?
I wish that was when I was in school, but I was in school in for the '87 team and the '89 team.
Or the 87, that would be Jimmy Johnson's first championship and then Dennis Erickson, correct?
That was correct, yes.
Okay. And what was it about covering those teams? Like, did those games really fuel your passion for sports writing?
Well, when I was in college, football at the U was everything.
Hmm.
And I just enjoyed being able to go to practice every day, being able to watch the guys, talk to the guys, interact with them, interact with the coaches, show up on game day at the Orange Bowl for my day in the press box. And it was a great adventure for a college student. It's a great way to work your way through school. I learned a lot. I picked up a lot of great contacts, people that I still keep in touch with today.
So Alex is a Cowboys fan. He has seen what Jimmy Johnson has done for his franchise. When you were there, did you know that Jimmy, because everyone says he had a very charismatic personality, were you ever around him like on a personal level, or did you just come from a distance and did you see any of those traits that made Jimmy Johnson what the excuse me, the great coach that he is today?
I was able to get to know Jimmy from the inside. I wasn't an outsider looking in. Being the fact that I was a UM student, I was treated differently, sort of like a member of the family. And I got to see the inner workings of the Hurricane coaching staff. I'd be working with him, Don Solinger, Tody Wise, and a bunch of the other guys that went with him to Dallas, Hubbard Alexander, Joe Brodsky, uh, Art Kehoe, who's probably the best college offensive line coach that I've seen in years. I was able to pick up the scheme and be a trusted insider.
Was there a difference between the styles of Dennis Erickson and Jimmy Johnson in your view? Because Jimmy, according to a lot of NFL films, and Shuffy, feel free to correct me on this, he's very outgoing with his personality. Dennis Erickson was more of letting his players run the show and being there as kind of like a mentor figure. Was there any difference between the two coaching personalities when you were there?
Well, Dennis treated everybody the same, whether you were Gino Torretta or he didn't coach Michael Irvin, but whether you were Brett Perriman or Horace Copeland, he treated everybody the same. Jimmy tended to treat the superstars a little different. He would let them
Mm,
get away with a lot more. He would treat them different. It's the same thing he did in Dallas. And he wrote in his recent book that he treated Emmett Smith a lot differently than he treated the 47th or 48th player on the roster.
right. Jimmy mentioned that with what was the guy's name? John Roper. Shuffy, think you remember that? The linebacker that was cut for sleeping, and a reporter did ask Jimmy if Troy Aikman was that, he would just said, Troy, wake up, and then walked away. And then the a football life documentary of Jimmy Johnson, you make a very valid point, Scott, that he would treat them, he had them on a scale specifically. When you saw Gino Torretta, and he was a really good player, but if you asked guys like Garrison Hurst and Marshall Falk, particularly that Heisman Trophy winning ceremony, Falk has said that he did not believe Gino should beat him out for the Heisman. Maybe that's competitive fire. What did you see in Gino Torretta during your time frame compared to Steve Walsh in 1987?
Well, they're two different quarterbacks. Steve was very cerebral in his throwing. He was more of a field general. Um, he could throw the deep ball, but he didn't rely on it. He relied a lot on curls and button hooks and post patterns, the 15, 20-yard outs, whereas Gino could throw the ball a country mile. And he relied on all of his physical attributes, and he was just a tremendous athlete. That's the way I would separate the two of them. But they were both very good at what they did. They were both champions. Steve should have been a Heisman winner, but he wasn't. And I enjoyed watching both of them play. I think that Steve and I keep in contact. He's was a high school coach down here for a while that I followed at Cardinal Newman. Then he went to IMG for a while. Now he's up in Canada, and we talk from time to time because we did go to school together. Gino and I didn't really get to know each other that well because he came in as I was graduating,
Mm,
and I was more of a Steve Walsh, Craig Erickson contemporary.
gotcha. Gotcha.
And C grew up down the road in West Palm Beach, so it was a fun couple of years. I think we lost 2 games my entire college career.
So it was much of a winning atmosphere. I think what was it? Jimmy Johnson said he lost 2 games in 4 years during his tenure, and the fact that you were there and you only saw 2 times the team walk off in defeat, that's unbelievable.
Who were
Before we
those
go
two
into any other,
losses, Scott? Can I ask who were those two losses? Was one of them Nebraska back then?
No, we lost to Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl in '86,
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
and we lost to Notre Dame on the infamous Cleveland
oh yeah,
Gary.
the Catholic versus convict. That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
and I interviewed Cleveland a couple of months ago, and he still swears to this day he scored a touchdown. He said the only question they had to decide was whether or not they were going to go for 2 or go for 1. He said, but I crossed the goal line and I had the ball with me. He said
I
the
see.
ground cannot cause a fumble, and he said that one play cost him millions of dollars in the NFL
Oh,
because it robbed Miami of a second straight national championship. And Cleveland believes he would have gone much higher in the draft if they had won 2 in a row, and he won 2 rings.
I
Yeah.
see.
There's some validity to that. I think if you look at draft classes of the last decade, even there's some of that translates, some of the Power Five success, some of the Heisman Trophy winners really as of late, it really came down to strength of schedule, winning at the highest level, not necessarily what you do or don't do individually. Even your team is just as much weighed in on the decision of who was truly the most dominant player. Like this year in the Heisman race, speaking of something like that, you got a guy like Penix against, Daniels over there at LSU. Super interesting, right? Because in my opinion, if I'm looking at it from who's the better player, I mean, Penix put the results forward, took Washington to a playoff, but Daniel's stats were so out of this world that you're looking at two different ways of looking at the context. Is it the most statistically impressive player, or is it the most on paper, the leader, the guy who's winning the close games, going undefeated, going to the playoff? Not only that, winning a playoff game, right? And at that point, I can't remember when Heisman gets announced, but it's somewhere right around there.
It's usually right after the if I'm not mistaken, right after the conference championships.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because remember, it's the conference championship, then the playoff schedule is announced. I think at the end of that week or the following week they'll do the Heisman.
I
But
think the playoff was set prior, and that I remember because they weighed in heavily on, yes, he's a playoff quarterback. But again,
yes,
Daniel's numbers were so outrageous, it was really hard to negate that from happening, I suppose.
do you think, Scott, if Miami had the playoff system back then, do you think they'd still be as dominant as they were?
Oh, absolutely. Those teams were as good as you'll see. I mean, one of my colleagues, Kyle Golick from Pittsburgh, we fight all the time over who was more dominating. Was it the 91 Hurricanes? Was it the 89 Hurricanes? Or he will bring up some other teams that he says was better, like some Ohio State teams or some of the Nebraska teams. And I just think that those Miami teams from the late 80s, early 90s, they were just untouchable.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the Hurricanes, we mentioned the 2001 team. That is viewed by so many as arguably the greatest team to ever take the college football field, considering who was on the roster and um, what they became in the NFL. Where were you covering that team? Not like at Miami, but were you at USA Today when that team was being covered? And did you have better access to that team as opposed to other writers, considering your contacts?
I had more access to the 91 team. I was still actively covering the team in 91. 2001, I was off the beat.
Mm-hmm.
I was practicing law at the time, and
Okay.
um, had more fun being a sports writer, and that's pretty much where it's at. And 91, I had a great season. I was disappointed in 92 when we lost to Alabama in the George T game when he
Yeah.
stripped Lamar
I remember that.
Thomas for a touchdown. But it happens. But those late 80, early 90s Hurricanes teams, you can't beat them. That 91 team, I think, would have given the 2001 team a good run for their money.
So you've been around us, so I'm inclined to believe that. So you were at Miami, and then you went to USA Today. You've been all over the beat. Was there some was there someone in the sports writing field that you looked at as inspiration and fueled your desire to be the best out there? Because for me, one of the guys that I admired growing up, in terms of the coverage business, was in terms of like sports reporters, Dan Patrick, guy who I've really admired there. He hasn't like written. He's been like a sports personality. Him and Rich Eisen are some of the guys that I really look up to in terms of being in that field. Who was that for you?
For me, I would have to say there were two guys, Edwin Pope from the Miami Herald and Greg Cody, who took over for Edwin Pope when he left the beat and retired. Those were two guys that really taught me a lot and really mentored me, took me under their wings. Edwin was probably the greatest sports writer of his time, and I always tried to emulate him from his pregame preparation to his note taking to watching how he asked questions. Um, Incidentally, I went to college with Dan Lebitard,
Hmm.
and Dan was my best friend in college. And I actually hired Dan to work for me when I was sports editor of the school newspaper, the Miami Hurricane. And
Hmm.
Dan and I became great friends, and his career's taken off, and God bless him. I'm glad to see he's doing what he's doing.
Right. So how did FanSided and NFL Spin Zone come into play for you? Because like for me, it's a very interesting story, but I want to get to yours first. How did that come about for you?
Well, I've been writing college football for Mike Farrell Sports, and we get a really good draw. We have a good feed. I write for them probably 3 4 times a week. And then once college season was over, I was looking for something to really fuel my juices. And the NFL was still going on. And the thing with the NFL is, as you know, Shuffy, I'm sure you can attest to this. NFL is year long. You go from the Super Bowl, you have a couple weeks off, you have the combine. After the combine, you got transition and franchise tags. Then you have free agency. Then the next thing you know, you got the draft rolling around. You got about 2 months of evergreen content. And then once the draft is over, training camp starts. So I figured that would be a good way to get my foot in the door. Was I got on the Dolphins beat with Finn Fanatic and took a liking to it. And then I got in with Spin Zone. And yesterday I just wrote my first column for Call to the Pen for the baseball website.
Mhm.
I
So
like,
that
Scott, that you've been able to touch some different areas. I was kind of looking up some of the work that all you guys do, and I mean that's the best part about journalism. Is there is no limit to whatever entices you, whatever you want to go ask questions about. I think that's the joy of it, and I think the people that are really good at it just truthfully enjoy asking the questions and allowing the stories to write themselves. Because if you're asking the right questions, they will. So I
Well,
think that that's really cool.
I always looked at it as it was up to me to get the answer. And I think by going to law school, it sort of helped me become a better questioner, a better interviewer. I was able to learn the tricks of the trade as to how to get an answer out of somebody when they might not want to answer the question. So my legal training has helped my journalism, and my journalism has helped my legal career by being able to investigate and get to the truth.
If I may, Scott, ask you a question. So with NIL being such a heavy topic of discussion, and when it really comes down to it, I mean, it was always the college athletes that when they're producing the revenue, they are the product themselves. If you're looking at it from a sheer, capitalistic point of view, right? Like that's what college football was. Can you speak to the legal implication of NIL and these students now representing themselves? I mean, my thought process was, I mean, how many of these kids now have lawyers? How many of these guys have sports agents who a lot of times have a history of a legal career? And how is that translated now into what you're looking at if you're a ESPN 300 prospect now versus in 1989 when you're going to play for Miami? Like, what are there really that many more details that these kids are having to pay attention to, or how does that work? And have you had any, have you come across anything like that where it's just larger than life?
First of all, these kids do have agents. When they set foot on campus, the agents scour them like flies. And the NIL to me is nothing more than pay for play. It's a legal way for them to put together a collective of boosters that put a pool of money together to pay players. Let's call it what it is. They're paying for endorsements. They're paying for people to show up to car sales. Nice cup. Is that the Mirage?
It is, yeah. I can't take credit for it, but it is.
That's God's house right there. And but I think that the NIL is really just pay for play. It's a way to legalize bag dropping, and the colleges are getting away with it. You look at a guy like Shador Sanders; he's making $4.7 million this year in NIL money, according to I think On3. On3 Sports came out with that. Travis Hunter on the same team is making 2.3 million. What incentive do these guys have to go to school? What incentive do they have to come out for the draft? They're going to make less money their rookie year than they did their senior year in college.
that
It's
is true.
incredible.
That's true. Even now, we see Ohio State, particularly that school, with the amount of money they spent on bringing folks into that school this past offseason. Shuffy, you and I talked about it with, what is it? Quinshawn Judkins, the former Ole Miss running back, coming back. Coming in there. Travion Henderson is returning, Virginia native. Emeka Egbuka, JT Tumualo, and a lot of those, Donovan Jackson. The list goes on and on. It feels like Ohio State is really building a super team to essentially do what Michigan has done the last 3 years, which, frankly, the scandal, whatever. Truth be told, they get busted for, they get busted for. It is what it is. But what Michigan has always been able to do is control the line of scrimmage. And Ohio State's done that to bring in a lot of players, but they seem to be bringing a lot more flash, because Will Howard, the Kansas State quarterback, the running backs we mentioned, the receivers, they brought in Jeremiah Smith, the top recruit. Defensive back core is returning, the linebackers are there. Yet the trenches, outside of a few names here and there, they haven't really brought in a lot there. Through your experiences, Scott, do you still believe the game's won through the line of scrimmage?
If you talk to Mario Cristobal, he'll tell you that the game is won up front. If you talk to any good offensive coordinator or offensive line coach, they're going to tell you that it all starts with the line play. I watched Miami this year, and they were a totally different team because they had good linemen. They had Javion Cohen at left guard, the transfer from Alabama. They had Francis Mauigoa at right guard, freshman All-American. Matt Lee at center, who was an All ACC performer. It makes a big difference when you have the big uglies up front that can control the line of scrimmage and push the linebackers out of the way so the running back can get to the second level.
So as we go forward with NIL, Shuffy, remember the conference realignment. There's been a lot of teams moving to the Big Ten. We got USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. One thing we like about the Big Ten is, in terms of academics, that conference is really good with academic programs, even if the athletics are not there. For example, Purdue with their engineering program, Michigan, their data science program. Washington is really good with their academics. Oregon has the marketing capability. And then we see the SEC's very good football powerhouses. My question for you, Scott, is it possible, do you think, that Miami could leave the ACC and end up in the SEC, considering the history of the program? And if they're in that conference, it might attract more people to stay home in that state to play for the Hurricanes.
Well, there's been talk about them going to the SEC or going to the Big Ten. Big Ten because of the academic standards that Miami has and the academic excellence that they've been able to display in the classroom. However, I'd really like to see them go to the SEC because Miami's a southern team with a bunch of kids from the south. It's the southeast part of the United States. I don't want to see them going into cold weather games 5-6 times a year. That's not going to be any fun for them. You know, it's bad enough that we have to go to Boston College or Temple every now and then, but I wouldn't want to play in Minnesota, have to go to Penn State, or go to Maryland or any of those other places where it's really frigid and we're going to have to play on a cold November day. And we're going to be bringing the kids that are used to wearing flip flops and sandals.
I can attest to that. I remember one time when Miami came to Virginia for a night game, and I met some Hurricane fans who traveled to Charlottesville, and they said it's one of the coldest times they've ever been in their life. So you make a very valid point there. Let's transition to the NFL a bit. Kansas City has won the Super Bowl, and Patrick Mahomes is a great quarterback, but the main problem right now we're seeing is the parade. What happened there? We saw one woman lost her life. 20 plus people were injured, including kids. Trey Smith, Creed Humphrey, and the rest of the team were sheltering those people. James Winchester and Smith were in a closet protecting kids. When you heard about the thing that happened in Kansas City during the parade, Scott, what was your reaction?
Well, my reaction was, oh my God, it's another Parkland. I'm 5 miles from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
Ooh.
So that hit us pretty hard. And February 14th was the anniversary of the Parkland shooting. And so it really brought that into perspective for me. Um, I felt bad, obviously, for everyone in Kansas City that was involved, and my heart and prayers go out to them. And it's about time that our politicians do something about gun control. I don't want to turn this into a politics debate,
That's fine. That's fine.
but that's really what it boils down to. You know, a good guy with a gun cannot stop a bad guy with a gun when he shoots first. Somebody's going
Absolutely.
to.
Right.
And
If I may
and
jump in here, this is what I do for work. So Scott, for a little background about me, I work in defense. I work with the Blazers, the Timbers, the Seahawks. I do the metal detection outside their stadiums.
fantastic.
And it's one of the things that I do here. And what it's coming down to with big, high participation events, right? So Taylor Swift set a new record for, yes, what she's putting in the stadium, but then ultimately in the sense of a Super Bowl parade or even having an event like a Super Bowl in your city, it's the surrounding area, it's the fan engagement sites. There are hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of more people than there typically will be on any given day because of the event that's drawing it to them. And so the exterior and public settings are so hard for weapons detection. And unfortunately, speaking of, the Parkland school, I get a lot of calls from school districts, and a lot of school districts are moving to, we want to put a metal detector at the door of some kind. And when it comes down to it, just kind of to the point you just said, good guy with a gun, bad guy with a gun. What I tell these schools is my systems are going to stand there and look pretty if there's something going on. It's going to catch a gun if it's on their person, but I can guarantee you, if there's a human being that wants to come into that school and do people harm, that metal detector is not going to stop them.
He's
You
getting in.
know, and that's the tricky part is. And so when I talk to these schools, I'm like, it's people, it's having a good plan, it's having a quick response task force with the police department and coordinating with them and working drills with them and saying, in case this happens, how fast can you guys be here? 2.5 minutes, great. And you work that down. And it just sucks that these conversations are having to be had like this, because spectator sports, and I've always loved how sports has avoided politics, but there's starting to be more crossroads, and it's alarming to me as someone, in my generation, knowing what I know about weapons detection and about weapons in general. It's so difficult to contain, and then it's mass chaos once it happens.
It's
Right.
horrendous. It really is horrendous. It's a topic that we really don't fancy here because of the devastation that we've seen. But it really comes down to the politicians, because you're always going to have bad guys with guns, but it's a question of what kind of guns are you going to let them have. And that's another story for another day. Let's go back to the Chiefs.
Yeah. That's fine.
So,
We just wanted to bring that
Trevon, if,
up
if you
there.
don't mind, can I get started on the Chiefs, because I have something I want to ask Scott about?
By all means, man.
Hey,
You
Scott,
gotta
so
ask a few questions, brother. Come on.
you said you brought up Jimmy Johnson, which I appreciate, because I love Jimmy Johnson. As a Cowboys fan, unfortunately, I was not alive to see his successes. So, we're still waiting here for a good omen. But my question for you is this: is when I look at the Chiefs, and I played 1 year of college football through high school, and then I ended up coaching at South Dakota State for a time as a graduate assistant, and just watched film and washed the laundry, did whatever was asking me for a little while before I ended up starting. And when I watch the Chiefs play football, I see an immense amount of confidence, and it almost looks thoughtless when they're having success. And if you watch the last touchdown to Mecole Hardman, Travis Kelce didn't even run a route. He just knew that once he grabbed the two guys that he was responsible for taking out of the play to get Hardman open on that side of the field, he never looked back at the quarterback as an option on that play. It was going to Hardman, and as soon as Kelce stepped off the line of scrimmage and took a step to the left and everyone followed him, he knew Hardman was open for a touchdown. He watched him catch it on the jumbotron. And the reason I bring that up is because it was that simple. That play was that simple. Mahomes knew where it was going. Kelce knew where it was going. Everyone knew what they needed to do. And so my question for you is this: is in today's game, there's so many new terms for a post route, right? You have concepts, you've got play calls with 15 different tags. And for someone that ran the power eye in high school to then transition to the college game and be like, wow, I have 3 post snap reads to make after the ball is snapped. I have to remember the play itself, but then once the defense sets up, I have to know option A, B, and C that fits cover 2, cover 3, cover 1, wall, whatever I'm seeing. And so my question for you is: you look at the game and you look at the Chiefs, do you feel like Andy Reid is it really that simple for them? I almost feel like their preparation is different. Like when they call plays, they might even be a one-word play. It's the preparation is so intricate and it works at such an effective level that Mahomes is not having to make 4 different progressions throughout the play. He's going with his first or second thought, and then he's winning on the fly, and it's just incredible to watch.
He's got 3 progressions. He's got the X receiver who's going to go run his route. He's got Travis Kelce, and he's got his check down, and that's really his 3 main thoughts. And when you can call a play and just go corn dog, and everyone knows what their assignment is, that's a lot easier than these plays with these 14 words and takes 45 minutes for them to call the play in the huddle, and they run out of time, and nobody knows what they're doing. It's exasperating. Andy Reid has this down to a science. His coordinators are on the money. I wrote about Spags re-signing his extension yesterday, and I was hoping that would have been the biggest news out of Kansas City for the day. But unfortunately, it wasn't. It was a side story. But we need to simplify things, and that's what you're going to see a lot of teams do now. They're going to simplify things.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching middle school ball, Scott, and the reason I had this thought was when I middle school basketball, I just went, we're gonna run 5 out, we're gonna run short corner. That's it. You got a zone beater and a man beater, and you're gonna be so dang good at it. And I wanted my kids to be confident off the line of scrimmage, right? To be confident on the court instead of having to think so hard and they're scared to think. I think that there's a huge testament to having a confident kid making a full speed mistake versus having someone who's not sure what they're supposed to be doing making a mistake. I'd much rather have the kid fail at 100% and
One of
mentally
the,
be in a place where he feels he can succeed at the least.
if you look at the way the Chiefs operate, they always find the soft spot of the zone, and they just have their receivers sit in it. They'll get 7, 8 yards a pop. You don't see Mahomes throwing the deep ball all that much because he doesn't have the receivers that can get down the field in 4.3 seconds. Although his offensive line will give him 6 to 8 seconds to throw the ball, but he's really looking at the 7 or 8 yard outs. He's looking at the bubble screens. He's looking. You don't see a lot of double high safeties playing against the Chiefs because they don't run the deep route.
So the Tyreek Hill concept, when Hill was there, they played a lot of defense for playing cover two. Todd Bowles, when they lost that Super Bowl to Tampa Bay, Todd Bowles put in a cover two package. And many folks will say, oh, the offensive line, this and that. I get it. But when I was a scout for my alma mater, Westfield High School, a lot of our opponents would play the cover two. They'd always have someone deep because we're fortunate to have some really fast guys, whether it be a Daniel Burns, whether it be a Christian Nunley. These are my teammates, by the way. Whether we've had a Ivory Frimpong, a Jalen Smalls, very shifty kind of receivers who could take the team, like Traquan James, especially. That was our favorite guy. We called him TQ. He could take the top off. Even if he didn't catch it, he's got people looking at him in a different way. And the cover two concept has been pretty commonly copied, but it also has a weakness with running the ball. Yet in this day and age, it seems like everyone wants to pass the ball more than run. Would you say that's correct?
I'd like to use Mike McDaniel as an example. He's got so many weapons at his disposal, but he runs to set up the pass.
Right.
He'll
He's a stickler for that. He's big on that. He's like A-Chain and Mostert. I'm going to run the ball hard, and I'm going to take my shot with Tyreek.
Same thing with Shannon Dawson over at the U. They're going to ground and pound, and then they're going to wait for you to let up, put 8 in the box to try to stop the run, and then they're going to have Tyreek Hill run a fly pattern. He's going to beat somebody out of their pants, and it's a 70-yard score because you can't defend both. When you have backs like Atchain and Mostert, who are 2 of the fastest guys in the league, and then you've got Waddle and Hill on the outside, and I don't know who they're going to line up in the slot this year. I don't know if Berrios will be back or if they're going to replace him, but they always have speed. McDaniel is a lot like Jimmy Johnson. Johnson built the Miami teams on speed. He built Dallas on speed. If you learned about those teams in the 90s with the Cowboys, they were all the fastest, uh, quickest off the line. Uh, Michael Irvin was slow at 4.3.
Slow at 4.3. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
guys
that's
like
a fun, that's a funny way of putting it.
you had guys like Alvin Harper coming out of Tennessee
Yep.
that were running high 4.2s. Um, they had a lot of great receivers, and you had Emmitt Smith in the backfield. He really knew how to put talent together because that's the way he assembled talent at the University of Miami. He didn't do anything different. He didn't reinvent the wheel. He did the same thing. He just did it with professional athletes.
That's a
Look at
thing I forgot
that
to ask
Dolphins
early.
team,
Mhm.
Scott, and it's that Dolphins team just so talented and it's so fast. And you're right, like they're starting to look like those teams of the '90s that just run around. Really, at the end of the day, right? And the conceptual game wasn't, I don't think, as I wouldn't say it was any harder or easier. It was just a lot less complex. Things were just not. There wasn't a million terms to how a smash concept was going to run because you weren't running 50 different motions to try to get to it.
Right.
And
They'll
so,
run everything out of the same formation.
yeah, and so my thing with McDaniel is my question is about him is this year specifically. Um, they had a lull in I think the middle of this year. They came out really hot, And my question for you is on that Miami team, do you see them this next year gearing up with free agents, or are they going to try to keep everyone at bay, kind of like Cincinnati did? Where Cincinnati this year, unfortunately, Burrow got hurt, but they had the same roster copy paste that brought them all that success. How does McDaniel manage that? To kind of get Tyreek Hill, maybe kind of a B option that is going to be a little bit more effective, as him and Waddle to me are very similar. They're a very similar player.
I think they need to get some speed in the slot so they can run the seam route. I think they need to sign their own free agents. They've got 5 or 6 that are really key: Christian Wilkins, David Long. Um, their entire secondary in the defensive backfield. You've got Brandon Jones, who's an unrestricted free agent. Robert Jones is an unrestricted free agent. You got to sign some of these guys and bring them back. I like what Anthony Weaver had to say today at the presser. He was very impressive, and they're going to run a multiple scheme on defense, which Vic Fangio didn't run. They're going to line Jalen Ramsey up like a chess piece, and they're going to move him around in the backfield, which they didn't do under Fangio. He would just play one side. He didn't even cover CeeDee Lamb in the Dallas game. He wasn't on their best.
Mm.
So I think Miami's going to be very interesting in 2024. They got to re-sign their own players, get a few more pieces of the puzzle, and I think they're going to be pretty tough. They need some more depth on that offensive line.
So my question, like now, is I'm not going to really get into predictions because that can go awry here. But throughout what you've seen this past season, what was the team that really caught your eye? Like, wow, I didn't expect them to do well based on their history, but this year they really caught lightning in a bottle. Was there a team like that for you this year, Scott?
I would probably say Cleveland down the stretch. They were on their 19th quarterback, and Joe Flacco came out. He's older than dirt, and he led them to 4 consecutive wins. I thought they finished the year strong. I think that Buffalo had some big wins, but they also had some big losses. Um, and I think that the Dolphins were close to being there, but they were just too banged up and too injured at the end of the season. They were limping into games and signing guys off the street who were starting 3 days later, like Melvin Ingram and Bobby Houston and a couple other guys that came in toward the end of the season. But nobody really surprised me this year. There's a lot of parity in the NFL,
Not even
and
Houston?
Houston really didn't surprise me because I'm a big fan of their coach, always have been, and I think C.J. Stroud has what it takes to become a dominant quarterback in this league. He really didn't get to utilize his talents at Ohio State. as much as he should have, just because of the offense that they ran and the conservatism of Ryan Day.
Mm.
But he's going to be a great quarterback. He's going to be he's going to be a superstar.
Yeah, the Ohio
Staying
State
off
quarterback, that's been a thing that I'm gonna let Shuffy go in just a moment here, but I agree with you. The Ohio State quarterbacks prior to CJ Stroud, not a lot of them. Apparently, I can't think of any of them that succeeded. Hell, the guy I like, Justin Fields, he's had his issues, and then we had what, Todd Bateman against LSU. That was one of the more notable flops. Um, Art Schlichter gambled pretty much his entire career away. Troy
Dwayne
Smith,
Haskins, may rest in peace.
God rest his,
Yeah.
yeah, but Dwayne, I think, I don't want to say too much about him. He was a great player, but there was some things going on. I really don't feel comfortable saying that. JT Barrett, Cardell Jones, who took him to the national championship, how they won that championship. I got to give credit to Zeke Elliott and the defense. But Shuffy, you had a question you wanted to ask? Go ahead.
Just to back off that, Joe Burrow and Quinn Ewers are both Ohio State quarterbacks at one point as well.
It's
But
true.
what I think the point I wanted to make was about Cleveland when Scott started talking about Cleveland being the team that kind of shocked him. So I was fortunate enough, a kid named Clayton Tune was my quarterback in seventh grade. And this year he was the backup at Arizona behind Kyler Murray when they traded Dobbs to Minnesota. And Kyler Murray didn't come back. So the one game Clayton got to start as a rookie this year was against the Browns. And he spent that entirety of his game on his butt. He got sat on by Myles Garrett multiple times through 2 interceptions. He had one fantasy point, and I started him because I believe in him because he was my best buddy in seventh grade. But what I'm getting at is Cleveland, their defense this year was fast. They pressured the quarterback well. They did not get beat over the top, rarely this year. Minus, I think, I want to say Pickens got him once for Pittsburgh. But I really liked that division this year. The fact that Baltimore, I think it said a lot more about Baltimore this year that they came out of that division because Pittsburgh at one point was leading that division. Cincinnati with a healthy Joe Burrow arguably could have been at the top of that division. And I really think that division to me has some of the most firepower heading into next year. They got a lot of guys coming back. They've got some youth that now has experience under their belt. And I'd really like to see Cleveland figure it out on the offensive side of the ball. And I could have been saying that same thing for the last 10 years as everyone has. But I've got a good feeling that one of these times they're going to get the right guy to run the show. They're going to get the right back to, hopefully they get Chubb. Hopefully he's okay. But yeah, Cleveland was awesome for a lot of moments this year where they were really blowing up the backfield and giving offensive coordinators some serious headaches as to what schematically they were doing.
I agree. Myles Garrett's an animal. Kevin Stefanski is a great schemer, puts together a great game plan. They've got a bright future there. They just got to get rid of Deshaun Watson's contract and basically start all over again at quarterback. Because I don't think Flacco's got it in him to go another 16 games.
Right.
He put his heart and soul into the 4 or 5 games that he played, but I don't see him lasting a whole season.
Right. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland did decide to go potentially draft a quarterback this year because there could potentially be some more discipline facing Deshaun Watson based on reports. And I agree with Shuffy, and I think you've also made good points that the AFC North, it's very competitive compared to a lot of other divisions. Either one of those 4 teams, if you put them up health for health, line them up, would it be wrong to say that any one of those 4 teams could have won the division this year?
Um, I don't know if I would
Pittsburgh's
go
got some
that
figuring
far.
out to do, I think.
Yeah, Pittsburgh still has to figure out what they're going to do under center. They released Trubisky, and
Right.
I think Kenny Pickett is long for that team. Um, they they they've got to solve their problem at quarterback, and until they do that, they're not going anywhere.
Well, and this
Right.
year, Warren was a nice addition for them because Najee Harris, I expected a little bit more production. I think as after his first year, he really is a good looking back, north south guy. Like I love watching Najee Harris run the ball when he's able to get his legs moving. But man, this year I can't even tell you how many times I've watched him get stuffed. But Warren runs like a man possessed, and I appreciated kind of his touch to that offense. I think that he gave them the support they needed when they were really struggling to move the ball at all.
Right.
I agree.
So, in terms of other teams, the head coaching cycles this year, Scott, I think we've seen them in Spin Zone chats. For example, New England moving off of Bill Belichick to Gerard Mayo. The Chargers now have Jim Harbaugh. The AFC West is going to be very interesting with that. Who else got it? Washington chose to go with Dan Quinn, former Cowboy defensive coordinator.
They sort of got what was left.
Yeah. Well, true, but the head coaching cycle this year, we saw a lot of coaches. Raheem Morris to Atlanta, can't forget him. Was
Great
there a
pick.
head coaching? Was there a head coaching hire that you looked at and you said didn't see that one coming?
I really didn't see Dan Quinn going to Washington
Mm.
until the end when I realized he was Tim Allen. He was the last man standing. He was the only guy left. It was either him, Vrabel, or Belichick, and they weren't going to hire Belichick, and they weren't too high on Mike Vrabel. I don't even think they interviewed him. The guy they really wanted was Ben McDonald.
Mike
Sorry,
McDonald.
I'm sorry, Ben Johnson.
Ben Johnson, Mike McDonald. Yeah, those
Yeah.
are the two young hot
Yeah.
shots. But Ben's return to Detroit, that's a stunner. I
Yes.
really thought for sure he'd get a job this year.
He could have had it if he wanted it.
I like that he's going back. Speaking of teams that were shocking, would be Detroit.
Well, yeah, I mean they had
Not
that.
shocking, not as much as what they had, but what they put together. I think that everyone knew that they had the talent to be good, but in that division was absolutely, I think, the weakest this year. Was the
NFC,
the NFC North. No offense to you, Siobhan, and your
No,
Bears.
no.
That-
I don't take
to
offense.
me-
I still believe that if Chicago had a competent team, they could have honestly challenged for that division title.
Absolutely.
But
and I think
unfortunately,
that
they're
it's-
not competent in any way.
If it didn't
There's-
snow in
well-
Chicago, I'd like to go there in the winter.
They are trying to build a new stadium, but the problem is they're so obsessed with the past. One thing I'll give Detroit credit for is this: they modernized. Minnesota modernized with a brand new facility. Green Bay, Lambeau Field, regardless of how old it is, the renovations they made to Lambeau Field ensured it will still be here for the long haul. Soldier Field, no, they didn't do that. They just believed that just sticking it was like putting a lipstick on a pig. If I'm going to be 100% honest, it felt like that.
That's what they did at the Orange Bowl, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, that's right, they did.
And that was my first girlfriend, the Orange Bowl. That's my first love.
Right.
And if you go to Call to the Pen, I wrote a column today on the Marlins curse for playing in a stadium
Oh, that's
built on
right.
the Orange Bowl land. So if you, I think you guys will enjoy that column.
And
Oh, we will. I'll definitely.
before we move on from coaches, if I may, I just want to point out, can talk about my Cowboys a little bit. So last year we lose Kellen Moore to LA, and I was hoping for success for him wherever he went because he did a lot of good things at Dallas with what he had.
Yeah.
Dalton Schultz, he showed the whole league how to utilize Dalton Schultz, and Houston took that playbook right from him and used Schultz this year. And Schultz to me was one of my favorite tight ends that's ever played at Dallas, not because he was larger than life, but because man, that guy was always open. But anyway, you look at Kellen Moore, he leaves, and now he's out at LA. So he's a guy that is tenured, had some success, has the stats to back it up on his resume. And I don't remember, I think Philly maybe grabbed him last I read.
I think
Philly
so.
grabbed
I think
him,
they're the
yes.
one.
Yeah. And then now Quinn's gone. So Dallas goes from we've won 12 games 3 years in a row. Right. And we've got rid of the OCDC, whether it was gotten rid of, got outbid, whatever the reason was, we decided not to retain those guys. And McCarthy calling plays this year, I can't say it was the best thing I've ever seen, but we had some other things to figure out. I think McCarthy calling plays wasn't the number one on the list that went wrong for us. But yeah, I think that Scott, here's a question for you. In your opinion as a coach, to build a program, it's different at the high school level, it's different at the college level. But in the NFL, you have such a small window to win and to win emphatically. To you, what to you, if you're looking to hire an NFL coach right now in today's game with today's level of talent and the interchangeability of that talent, because there's so many guys you can trade wherever you want, you're going to get the same route. you're gonna get the same 40 speed, which is crazy to even say, but there's that many guys running a 4.4 now. My question for you is what's the type of coach you're looking for as a GM? And then on top of that, are you leaning on the side of 2, 3 years, and if you can't figure it out, get the heck out of my face, or are you leaning on the side of, man, give this guy a chance to really, put his roots down and start building something?
2, 3 years is not enough. I think you got to give somebody 4, 5, 6 years to go ahead, lay a foundation, put the predicate in place, and start building the team that he wants. He's going to inherit a team. It's like Deion Sanders when he took over at Colorado, who I've written about extensively all year. Deion took the entire Colorado team and said, "Thanks for coming. Don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. We're going to let you guys go to the transfer portal, and I'm bringing in my own luggage." And he brought in 70 new players. Well, you can't do that in the NFL every year. If you bring in 10 guys, that's a lot. So you need to
That's
have
true.
time. You'll get a smattering of free agents, 4 or 5, maybe if you're lucky, that can play and start for you. Then you might find 2 or 3 out of the draft that can start for you. So that's really a lot. You're looking at 7 or 8 guys, and to turn a roster over, it takes 4 or 5 years to do that. And you got to sign guys to cap friendly contracts. You got to restructure deals. It's a different game today.
I
Right,
think
and
I think
the ability to
Dallas.
retain is rough. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, Dallas has been so frustrating because we were successful the last 3 years, and it is just the one team I watch the most, so I'll probably have the most insight on what they've got going on. But you look at guys like Noah Brown goes to Houston, has success. Dalton Schultz goes to Houston, has success. Ferguson stepped up big time at the tight end role this year to help Dak out because Dak needs that check down guy. He needs that big target in the seam to just drill the ball into his chest, and he'll take the shot from the safety because he's 6'8", 260, right? But at the end of the day, I look at all this chaos that I started with, I led with today. Like there's just so many transactions happening, there's so many moving pieces, and it is just so hard to find, I think, predictability in that, reliability in that, just finding a culture of a team. And it's a business, and I understand that more than anybody. I work in sales. It's my job to go create revenue, right? I have to go find business, and that's the NFL. You got to go find a guy that's going to create production, and how do you fit him in with the rest of the team? And I think that there's a lot of impulse in the management offices in the NFL right now, and that's killing them. And it is really killing a lot of really good teams and a lot of really good quarterbacks that, in my opinion, should be finishing higher and should be putting up better numbers. And I don't know if it's because the coordinators are just stuck in their ways. I don't know if it's the scheme being too complex for the guys to really take it in stride and be able to transfer in and kill it. Uh, but man, there's just so much going on in the NFL. It's just turned into a crapshoot, I think, in free agency. And I'd really like to see. I hope Cincinnati does well because they've paid their guys. They've paid Higgins, Jamar Chase, Mixon. They're trying to hang on to offensive line, defensive guys. Burrow's obviously there for the long haul. Like they're bought into Zach Taylor and what he's got going on. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Granted, Burrow can stay healthy. Jamar stays healthy. Irv Smith was such a good addition this year. I was super disappointed for that fan base because that team was hot and ready to go this year, in my opinion.
The problem
I
with
believe they're going to win
Cincinnati,
next year. I have them winning the Super Bowl next season, Cincinnati. I think they have a good shot with. And remember, Joe Burrow's big moment in college came in the Louisiana Superdome along with Jamar Chase. What's to say they can't replicate it next year?
the problem with Cincinnati is if they don't win on the player's first contract, then they're never going to win with that player because he's never going to get to a second contract because
That's
they just
true.
they just don't pay. They're like crime; they don't pay. And players are always walking away from Cincinnati after their first contract. Everybody wants to sign a 5-year deal and then get out because that's when you can hit unrestricted free agency. The Brown family just doesn't open up the checkbook.
That is true, and that's really been one of their major issues as to why they're not able to win and have a sustained level of success. But I think it's possible now that Joe Burrow's there, he might be willing to help them out. But we'll see what that goes there. And Scott, before we wrap this up, I like to ask this a lot of my guests here. What do you got next coming for you? You've written for all these publications. What's next on the deck? What can we expect from you?
Oh, I'm sure I'll have some draft coverage coming up. We'll have some pre-combine material. I'll be live in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. We're going to have a lot of content on Mike Farrell Sports. We'll also have it on Spin Zone and Fin Fanatic. I'll be doing previews on the Dolphins draft. I'll do previews on some of the college players that are coming out and where I think they have the best chance to succeed. It's going to be a busy couple of months.
Well, we appreciate you taking your time. And for those of you listening, thank you so much for watching tonight. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Follow Scott, myself, and Shuffy. You can find all of our work on our Twitter page. We'll be back with more shows in the future. We hope to get more guys. We'll probably bring Scott on for another episode. As we progress further, we want to thank him for joining, talking about the University of Miami, one of the great sports dynasties in college football. And Scott, for me and Shuffy, we really want to say thank you for taking the time. I know it's a very busy day, and we have really busy schedules, especially as you said, the NFL is 24/7, 365. So really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us tonight.
My pleasure. I'm always here for you guys.
All right, for all of you again, please make sure to subscribe down below. Thanks for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.